Betsy DeVos has turned out to be one of the most controversial cabinet picks in the Trump administration. The Michigan billionaire has been education secretary for only a few weeks, but her steadfast support for school choice has already triggered a tidal wave of criticism and opposition. Advocates of the public education system fear her bottom line goal is to privatize it.
Well, more recently, DeVos failed to stop the Trump administration's rollback of a 2016 federal guidance protecting the right of transgender students, an estimated 150,000 of them across the United States, to use the bathroom of their choice. Now, what might this mean to the well-being of the transgender community as a whole? And where in general is education policy headed over the next 4 years?
Joining us today are Zakiyah Ansari, Advocacy Director for the New York State Alliance for Quality Education. Welcome back to BK Live. Thank you for being here. And Lorenzo Van Ness, Associate Human Rights Specialist at the New York City Commission on Human Rights. Thank you both for being here. We really appreciate it. Zakiyah, why don't we start with you? Let's talk about how does DeVos's appointment impact the way students and teachers in New York, Brooklyn specifically, experience school on a daily basis?
So, I mean, we all knew that she was, at minimum, not qualified. I believe it was a slap in the face to public school students, parents, and community members who should make the choice to send their children to public education. To have somebody in charge that has no experience is actually, her agenda is just the opposite, right? And I think we had a little bit of that with Kathy Black. I don't know how many people remember in New York, we had a Kathy Black, was the same thing, magazine exec, had no experience and had to have someone follow her around everywhere she went. But every time she opened her mouth, it was something that was detrimental and just was controversial. What we do know, though, is that potentially, her commitment to ensure that that we're moving in that direction opposite public is clear for everybody else, and that the impact of her potentially shutting down, which is rumored that we heard, right, that the U.S. Department of Education could no longer exist, could cost our schools $2.5 billion, and that money would go to the neediest students as well as students with disabilities. So while she is a problem, I think even from our organization's perspective, we think weighing both of them, that Governor Cuomo is a problem too.
And I do have to note that Kathy Black had a very short tenure.
She did.
Very, very, very short tenure. Lorenzo, I want to bring you into the conversation. What impact, if any, and I'm sure it does, but what impact, in your opinion, would you say that the administration's changes will have on transgendered students immediately in New York City?
So luckily in New York City, the human rights law and the anti-discrimination law protects New Yorkers from discrimination based on gender identity or expression. So everyone is entitled to use the restroom consistent with their gender identity. So in New York City, we're very fortunate that repeal or that action won't really have any impact on the students here. As the New York City government is very dedicated to make sure that all New Yorkers have access to restroom consistent with their gender identity.
And how is it viewed that President Trump, after getting into office, was so quick to address such an issue? How do you feel personally about that?
Well, I mean, as a transgender New Yorker, I think it's really unfortunate that we are trying to not apply the laws equally to everyone. But I am very proud of being a New Yorker and the fact that in New York City we do have protections and we enforce these laws and we take that job very seriously.
We keep saying how we do here in New York City and New York State, but how does this play out in other communities around the nation?
Look, we cannot normalize what this president is doing. The attacks on our most vulnerable populations of folks, our immigrant population, our Native American brothers and sisters, our transgender children, right? So from promoting someone who has no experience with public education, that sends a message to me as a parent of 8 and a grandmother of 3 that you don't care about black, brown children across this country, much less our most neediest population of young people that fight every day to just get through the moment of having a successful career in education. And so this attack that we are seeing, I don't think it's, one thing I just want to make sure that we're not normalizing this. We need to call this out at every measure and make sure that the president knows and those who are supporting of him, just like we're seeing folks take to the streets, that we will not allow these attacks on our children, whether it's through Betsy DeVos or this crazy push to attack our LGBTQIA young people and communities.
And for some who may not know about it, can you explain this privatization path and the other ways that Betsy DeVos, the way that she, like you mentioned, has no prior political experience, how does that threaten the children in New York City or across the country on a day-by-day level?
Yeah, so I think, for me, it's always about, what I've always heard is that all politics is local. And so while Betsy DeVos is a challenge, absolutely, and that we will fight to continue to push back against what she's connecting to, what we need to do is make the connection. So Betsy DeVos is out there talking about inhaling our governor in New York State and saying that she's proud of him, of his movement towards privatization and school vouchers, which was the education tax credit that Governor Cuomo is pushing, right? That the president is using the same talking points as our governor, talking about public schools are a monopoly, this attack on them, right? That we need to push for more privatization, more vouchers, right? You can't make up those talking points, but we have to pay attention to them. Right now, we're in this budget season right now, and we don't want the governor to go under the radar of acknowledging that he has proposed a budget that is very similar, is actually worse than if we don't get the $2.5 billion federally. We could lose $4.3 billion in the next few weeks with his proposal to repeal a foundation aid formula that, once again, in the same vein of federally, would attack and impact black, brown, poor children all across the state.
It raised a really great point. There was an article that was in the paper yesterday, and we're talking about power rankings in New York City, and they were saying how the governor fares as compared to the mayor, how Senator Schumer is the most powerful politician in New York City right now, precisely because of New York's position as a sanctuary city and President Trump's sort of threat to withhold federal funding from New York State. So if that funding is, somehow taken away from New York, how will that play out in education?
Well, I think in general, in New York City, the Department of Education is really dedicated to making sure that we can support the children that, the students that go through our schools. I think we will do everything that we can to fight to make sure that we do get the benefits that our children are entitled to, really.
And Lorenzo, go ahead, Zakiyah. Do you want to add something to that, please?
I want people to understand that currently, because of a 10-year lawsuit in 2006 that we're still fighting to get, New York public schools across this state are owed $4.3 billion. If you're a parent out there, you're a community member, you're a teacher, you're a principal, you know the impact of not having music programs, art programs, advanced placement courses, the list goes on and on, it's having on those young people that you are trying to push through a successful career. That's the impact that it could have if the governor does not push forth and really, what is a sanctuary city if we're not ensuring that our schools are okay? What's a sanctuary state if we're not ensuring that on all aspects, including public education, that our children are feeling safe, that they are well funded, so that schools can provide all the resources, including social workers, guidance counselors, and all those other things that help our students get through the toughest times.
Lorenzo, in terms of transgender issues, what are some of the steps the NYC Commission on Human Rights is taking to safeguard the well-being of transgender students?
Yeah, for sure. So a few of the different steps that we've taken, for example, in December of 2015, we issued a legal guidance that really talks about the different ways that discrimination looks like, right, in the workplace and employment in public spaces, and then we have made sure to train folks on what those types of discrimination are, how to identify them, and how to combat them as well, and how to prevent them. So one of the other things that we've done is we've actually started doing a training called Working with Transgender Communities that we've done with different city agencies as well as a lot of organizations throughout the city, so that it's it's part cultural competency training, but it's also part about the human rights law, so that people know that the law does protect trans and gender nonconforming people. And
Lorenzo, what advice would you give to transgender students?
Well, I think one of the most important things is you're not alone. We are fighting to make sure that you have the rights that you should have. And you are loved, basically, because I think that's the most important thing. A lot of the times these kinds of actions tell people that they're not worth anything. But we need every student across the country to know that they are loved, that they are worth something, and they are valuable.
Amen. Zakiyah, can you tell us about the March for Education event coming right up?
Absolutely, and I can't agree more with you, right? Part of showing children that they are loved in this state, in this country, in this city, is ensuring that they're funding their education as one example. And so while we're pushing and fighting against Governor Cuomo, the reality is we know what we want. And so on March 4th, we have a People's March for Education Justice that's happening all across New York. We have one happening here in New York City where we'll start at 9:30 a.m. across the street from Trump International Hotel. And then we will march to about a 40-minute walk to Governor Cuomo's office. We are bringing it to the front door of the governor. He may not be there on Saturday, but we will be there.
Where is that building again?
The International, it's at 1 Central Park West.
Okay, gotcha. Go
Yes.
on, please.
Yeah, and so we are bringing it to the doorstep of Governor Cuomo to say, if you really care, like the reality is he holds no credibility. This man has been in office for almost 8 years. We can count 2 or 3 schools, if that he has visited. So when he uses his rhetoric around we spend more money, he hasn't been to a school. So how do we hold him accountable for that? Is doing this march. And we were inspired by the Women's March, obviously. 10 actions, 100 days. We've been doing actions over and over again throughout this budget season. So we're bringing it to the front door. We want folks to join us. March for on this Saturday, People's March for Education Justice.
We have a couple minutes left. Lorenzo, we want to ask you, what can transgender students do if their rights have been violated?
Sure. Folks can reach out to the Commission on Human Rights, and we can definitely work with the Department of Education and try to make sure that we rectify the situation. But the Department of Education has various policies to protect transgender students. If folks have faced any discrimination, not just in school, but at work, in housing, or in public spaces, they can reach the Commission by calling 311 and just asking for the Commission on Human Rights.
Okay, so I think we have maybe 60 seconds left. Zakiyah, when it comes to struggling schools in New York City, people have to get out, they have to march, they have to make their voices heard, but how can people sort of continue to be part of the effort?
Absolutely. So we have a website. If you go to our website, aqeny.org, there's constant things that you can do in regards to pushing back budget season, maybe from January to March. This is a constant in regards to ensuring that schools are funded, that there's local work that can be done. So even if you contact us, we can connect you to other folks who are doing kind of the city work. But one thing we know for sure, that a governor who proposes 10 cents on a dollar of money owed to our children, I question whether they really believe in equity. And someone who has not visited our schools but can tell teachers and parents that they don't need more money, I struggle that they are Democrats and that they care about our kids.
And this is going to be a big issue at the March for Education. If Cuomo or DeVos were watching BK Live, what would you have to say to them, Zakiyah?
We comment for you.
Listen, we want to thank you both very much for being here and fighting for these rights and all the work that you do. And thank you very much for coming on BK Live. We'll have you back again sometime soon. And thank you very much.
You have to give us an update on how the march went.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I'd love to.